This is Patrick McCrae filling in, and I'm with Alan Gallant, and we're those Collinsport boys for a resident of Collinwood. And our standard bearer and voluptuary, Jule Saynes, could not be here this evening because he was performing some sort of tracheotomy on the Pope, or I have
some unnatural act. Yes.
It was a good one though, and so he left it to us to answer your queries. We've been getting a lot of letters lately, letters and telegrams about this Road to Wellville thing. A lot of Boyle fans out there demanding that we cover this film, and you know. All kidding aside, we were talking about the Alan Parker picture Road to Wellville, which I believe was 1994.
Yes, correct.
And for me, it is a wonderful side quill to Dark Shadows, because I can so easily see Edward Collins and Count Petofi winding up at the San for some reason. And by the San, I mean the sanatorium run by John Harvey Kellogg. John Harvey Kellogg's the cousin or brother of the Kellogg who brought us the cornflake, although he invented it.
Yes.
And like Sylvester Graham invented the cornflake to have the twin effects of curing constipation and ending masturbation.
Yeah.
So then was the cornflake developed for the very same reasons. He was very concerned about this. And it was referred to at the time, historians have referred to this era, late 19th century, early 20th century, essentially the Edwardian era, as the anal age. That's an actual historical term, because medicine at the time, which was just, sort of flirting with germ theory, really believed that roughage and a proper bowel movement and staying away from the touching of the genitalia were the signposts, the guides to a happy and healthy life.
They had commercials touting regularity up until the 1970s, which would have been the generation that knew about Kellogg.
They were about Kellogg. Less and less so as years went on, but I think it seemed to be so simple. Get the smelly weird stuff out of your body,
and
keep the other stuff in your body.
Yes,
and we don't have to call the cops.
The vital.
So that's my long.
Yes.
Yes. So that's my half of the introduction. That's sort of where we are and why we are. It's a fun movie, and so Alan, what are your thoughts, or what would you add in terms of an introduction to this chat?
Well, I mean, it's an incredible. It is somewhat satirical, but it's also an incredible window on the times and a commentary on the things that you spoke about and the sort of obsessive anal examination, if you will, because it really is that. I mean, it's like enemas and roughage and all sorts of things. But there's also an element of sexual repression. Which is valved out. You open the valve of sexual repression through official, but yet shady medical sort of acceptance. In other words, you go, if these women want clitoral stimulation, they go to these doctors to get it because it's medicine.
They're Hunderbunen therapeutic.
They used to call it hysterical therapy.
Yes.
And the misogyny of the term notwithstanding, it was basically some male doctor stimulating a woman sexually.
Manipulation of the womb, Mr. Lightbody.
Yes. So there's a lot of repressive stuff. There's a lot of anal explosion, if you will.
Sure. I think probably a lot of prostate stimulation was, you know, accidentally happening through.
Yes,
Uh,
but it was also frowned upon, and Kellogg frowned upon the clitoral stimulation as well. He was, at least in this movie, he was telling um, the husband, you should see to your wife, that sort of thing.
it's interesting. There is a double standard that he has, because he keeps talking about, avoiding sexual stimulation, sexual action, and then he will, though, take people aside,
Yes,
and give them the real scoop
yeah.
on something. Yes, a woman has needs. See to your wife.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering how Kellogg justified it, or if he ever had to.
I probably didn't have to at that time. If so, it would have been later in his life. I mean, and unlike what they showed in this particular movie, his demise was not midway through taking a dive, which was hilarious. But he actually lived to be 91 years old and lived into the 1940s. So apparently he could justify his longevity through his practice.
And he might be right. I mean, at least things that were concomitant effects of the practice. He did have a very, very, very stark, austere, but healthy diet.
Yes.
Low fat, low sugar, probably very high protein. It was a vegetarian diet. He was doing pretty well.
Yeah.
So this is based on a novel by a man whose name I cannot pronounce. T. Corgesian.
I'm not sure either, to be honest with you. I would need to look at the spell.
Something like that.
Yeah.
He's a very funny writer.
Uh-huh.
I mean, just a real, is like John Irving meets Gene Shepard. Just very, very, very beautiful use of language and very funny use of language. And he whisks you into the era just with his sentence structure immediately, and nevertheless has a lot of fun with it. And he's telling the story of John Harvey Kellogg.
Yes. It's interesting. To me, the Hopkins' choice of dialects and strange sorts of occlusions and everything else that he does is very, it's, I mean, the obviously the fake buck teeth contribute to that, but it's amazing. He's obviously studied and practiced and pushed and just figured out every detail of this. And because there's aspects of him in it, of course, but it's consistently this other thing.
At the time this movie came out, it was around the time Nixon came out. And everybody I knew, I was in grad school at the time with a bunch of actors. I was a directing major, and everybody I knew was going on and on about Anthony Hopkins and Nixon, how good he was.
Right.
And I didn't see Nixon until I was working at a video store and was there alone every day and just had to take up the time somehow.
Yeah.
And I loved it. Now it's one of my favorite movies. But I'd seen the trailers and I thought, it was pretty good. And there's no Christian Bale as Dick Cheney. Good God, what a transformation.
That was
amazing.
And that, I think, the last time he was going to gain that much weight. He said that it was by that time he's getting into his late 40s. And he said, I don't think I'm going to do this anymore. With the Machinist, he got so thin, and then he got ripped for Batman. And with this role, he gained like 60 freaking pounds.
Yeah. But we're talking about Tony Hopkins and Nixon.
Yes.
And I was talking about how great he was. And I thought, well, he's okay. And then I saw this. I didn't even know it was him. At first, when he's in the chair and all of that,
giving that first monologue, to the reporters, that's a great monologue. It's fantastic. It's fabulous, and it's a real pyrotechnic sort of scene for him. He's just like, okay, I've got this down. I got this character. Here it is. This is all you need to know. to start with, I will fascinate you for the next 2 hours.
And he does. It was almost like he picked the most interesting American accent attached to someone who made his living as a public speaker. And more than anything, more than being a doctor, he was a public speaker who persuaded people to come to the Saynes,
right,
and spend sometimes months there, sometimes move in, and just spend scads of money to stay there.
Yeah, and I thought also, in order to sort of bolster what his persona was and what his energy was, they do a really good job with introducing Eleanor. And she is a member of his health cult, literally. I mean, it is a health cult for some of these people. They're really, really into it. So Bridget Fonda is great, I think, in that respect. And she's playing sort of a naive, very enthusiastic person, a very concerned person, a person who is vulnerable, and with a husband that isn't quite on board with a lot of the stuff that she's into.
Well, she has a lot of PTSD.
Yeah.
Because her story is really interesting. It's very educational, and they tell a huge story of American life in just a few sentences, where she's giving her autobiography, and she says, "Yeah, well, my husband's here because he's detoxing from opium,
right, and alcohol. He's drunk.
Yeah, opium. What's that?" She said, "Well, he was an alcoholic, and he came home in rages, and it was horrible. He's very abusive, and so I found ads for this tonic." And if I gave him the tonic every night, and the movie's very serious about this. It really is. It's very touching. And she said he just slept, and it was wonderful at first. And then I started to get concerned, and we went without the tonic, something like that, and he became really strange. But anyway, she says, I realized it had the juice of the poppy, and I turned him into an opium addict. And so that's why he's coming.
Right. And that's a lot of the source of her guilt too. That she has.
Oh yeah.
She goes back and forth between being pissed off at him because and guilty, feeling guilty. This is a great era in American life. This is a turnstile era between like 1895 and 1910 or something like that. As you said before, it's essentially Edwardian. It's the late Victorian through the Edwardian period. And there's a lot of things going on. We haven't reached the Food and Drug Administration establishment yet. So you have patent medicines, and you have dope slingers who are putting it in alcohol and selling it over the counter.
Yeah.
That sort of thing is happening right now. So.
You had a lot of hemp medication.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hemp-based medication.
And heroin. They thought heroin was non-addictive when they first introduced it.
Of course. But you also had Dusseldorf belts.
Yes.
And the bizarre Victorian stuff. I mean, can you imagine what the 1890s equivalent of the CES would have been like? The Consumer Electronics Show?
Yes. No.
What?
Well, you would have electrical genital belts, which they had in catalogs. I mean, you could get them in Sears catalogs. I
had one of those in a play. I had a Dusseldorf belt, and it was great. No, you don't have to wear one. He's going away. Okay.
Sorry.
No, it's fine.
I'd let the dog in. He was scratching at the door.
I understand. But it was great. We had lights all over, little LEDs.
Yeah. Oh yes. You have to. Yeah. I've seen ads for that in old catalogs and magazines, and it's just absolutely insane. Right there next to radium tonics and
sure. Well, that's a great thing about growing up in the 70s is that we had that massive wave of nostalgia, that stuff, and the People's Almanac and things of that nature always had reprints of those ads.
Yeah.
And that's that distance from nostalgia is something that I feel saddest about when I'm talking to kids,
Mm-hmm.
because I try not to pull the, well, in the old days number,
Yeah.
but there really is now an apocalyptic divide, and just I did a project last semester where I said, give me 2 or 3 famous covers of Time magazine. What a dumb assignment. Totally normal for you and me.
Right.
When they had the big coffee table books about life and time and so on
Yeah.
and so forth, and
Sure.
it was just in the zeitgeist still.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know what the hell Time magazine is.
Right. I
Much
have
less
a Time magazine that was published on my birthday, and it has Shakespeare on the cover.
That's great. That's great.
So, my sense of that sort of thing has always been pretty, probably since Dark Shadows and the time travel stuff. My sense of the past has always been pretty sharp. But yeah, and that's where the nostalgia comes from, although the nostalgia usually comes from the sense of, not always completely, but from the sense of one's own past or one's family's past. And so it can be multi-generational. Like in the 70s for our parents' past, it was the Happy Days stuff and the 50s and all of that sort of thing. But when you're talking about going past that, then you're talking about having an interest in our grandparents' past.
My grandparents, when these coffee table books were coming out, they were in their 40s, their 50s.
Yeah.
And so it was nostalgia for what their grandparents had.
Sure.
Out.
Yeah.
And I feel like
that form of connection to, that isn't as traditional as it once was, with the keeping of letters and so on and family histories, which is still out there, but it's people don't access it as much, especially younger people don't access it as much.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you and I couldn't help but do it. It just was everywhere. It was in our faces. It was what you got for renewing your subscription.
Yep.
And so on. And so, yeah, that just naturally was there. And what a lovely thing to live concurrently with history.
Yes, it is. It enlivens things.
And this movie, I feel like, is a last gasp of that culture, even though they didn't know, meaning the culture of nostalgia.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Even though they didn't quite know that's what they were making.
No, they were making a historical satire for sure, and they picked a great topic for it. But they were also incredibly specific about the settings, the street scenes, and the interiors, and all of that stuff was very, very well done, I thought.
So there are reflector characters for all of this. There's a reflector character for Will Lightbody, and that's Charles Ossining, played by the wonderful John Cusack.
Yes.
And there's a reflector for John Harvey Kellogg in the character of Goodloe Bender.
Yeah.
What a name. Michael Lerner, who just, they really should have let him keep the wig and the mustache.
And let him use it for like 20 years. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he was ready to play Harry Mudd, and he would have been fantastic.
Yeah.
Wow. I just desperately want a sequel where I see more of these characters.
Yes.
And what they're up to. But Charles Ossining is guy's inherited a bunch of money, or is managing money for an aunt.
Yeah.
And is perfectly happy to sell cereals and health tonics and things like that he knows aren't really effective. Right. But he himself is being scammed.
Yes.
Everyone's scammed to one extent or another, including Kellogg, who's being scammed by his own nonsense and by the culture of pseudoscience. But you have Goodloe Bender, and who is this amazing uber con man, just there to collect Charles's money.
He's completely skilled at doing it. He'll con the marks. He'll con his partner, who becomes just another mark. Although it's obvious that he's a likable guy and all of this, but he's not going to do anything. But you can't trust him. He's a bullshitter.
So yeah, and so you have I kind of wonder, who the sincere characters are, and I think it's Eleanor Lightbody,
Eleanor is, yeah, I think so too.
Miss Muntz, Miss Green,
George, in his way.
George is very, yeah. I mean, the sleaziest character in the movie, Dana Carvey,
Yes,
is also
he's real.
he's very real. And then the one character who I think is a very low level, John Harvey Kellogg, and that's Lionel Badger, played by Colin Meaney, with this amazing red wig that's clearly a wig.
Yeah.
And he's just there to be a voluptuary.
That's right. He's a creeper.
But he's open about it.
Yes, he is totally open about it.
And even
waving it around in women's faces, literally.
even revels in it. And he only lies once, and that's when he claims that he was massaging his colon.
Yes.
When what a weird euphemism that was. I was not doing that. I was massaging my colon when Will Lightbody catches him in the woods with the Handerbooging guy and his wife.
Yes. Another hero was in the middle.
Another pure character in this, and I forget her name. It's Cameron Manheim's character. It was Bryce Smiles.
Yes.
Yeah, and Mr. Unpronounceable, and the character played by the guy who played Baron Munchausen, John.
Oh yeah. Oh God, I forget his name now.
He likes the amphitheaters. He likes all the electricity.
Yes.
Nibble.
Yeah.
Those actors, every one of them, had to sit down with the script and just say, "You mean I get that moment?
I get to do that?
I get that moment to add something indelibly to pop culture." Thank you. Thank God I don't have to do realism.
It's a great ensemble cast with, a few primaries in there, of course, but it's a great ensemble cast. It really is. Everybody gets to sort of become part of the experience of the whole story. And
everybody looks like people looked back then.
Yes. Yeah.
If you see photographs of just how...
that's part of, makeup, costume, set, direction, all impeccable in this movie. I found myself in that. Also, the interestingly enough, the soundscape sort of takes you there too. Even the dialogue, the way the dialogue echoes in the rooms, slightly, that slight sort of thing, the tall ceiling echo. And
that's right.
Stuff that's
right. It does.
That all kind of draws you in as well. So it's all really, really well done.
Agreed. So, as I think we've talked about enough favorite scenes and so on, we haven't whittled it down to one. Obviously, for me, this is a 10 out of 10. I think it's just a priceless movie. I love it.
It is. It's a really nice piece, and it's an acting piece, and it's a screenplay piece. Both. I mean, it all merges at a high level, I think.
The last time I tried to find this on streaming, it wasn't easy, and I think I had to go to YouTube. I don't know if that situation's gotten better.
It's on Tubi now as well.
It is. Thank God, Tubi. Yeah.
Yep. But yes, it's still on YouTube as well. But I think it's the television version on YouTube, so they blur out people's bosoms and
they do.
Yes.
Well, that's no fun.
That's no fun at all.
All right.
So Tubi it is, right?
Or not to be, yeah. You wait for that joke, and yet there's never a setup that really works for it. But in the words of James Whale, it's part of the ritual, and so it's this. Alan, thank you so much. This was great.
Thank you very much. Pleasure as always.
All right.